Hello EVE Online pod players. I'm going to talk to you about fittings and what makes fittings fail. And so hopefully your fittings won't be laughed at, and if you see a fitting, you'll know whether or not you can laugh at it. Alright, so I've grabbed some fittings from various ships across the spectrum, and what we're going to do is look at typical EFT warrioring, which is basically just the idea of creating fits on EFT that look great until you realize how these ships are actually going to be fielded in EVE Online. So let's just start off with the Cerberus. So as we look at the Cerberus, we see that it's got a lot of damage. These the whole low slot is aligned towards damage. It has a little bit of resist for shields, nothing to extend, and a little bit of speed and a couple of boosting. You can see that this Cerberus is looking at optimizing its range, so you can tell that this fit is looking at long range. Now, I mentioned range because that's one of the considerations when looking at the modules. Are you going to be able to keep the range? There's your prop mod. How much range can you really get? There's 65 kilometers. What's your targeting range? 243 kilometers. Do these sensor boosters really make sense to lock something out that far when you're only going to be engaging at 65 kilometers, ideally? So this is an example where the choice of the ham does not make sense in comparison with the sensor boosters. So these modules are conflicting in their range. You'll find that's very common for people to fit modules that conflict in their range, where the ranges assume that the ship is going to be at different distances, or can be at various distances that you're trying to aim for. So you might consider instead beefing up the tank. You might have a shield extender, a large one, and maybe a little bit more resist on this particular part. 65k, is that really realistic? I mean, that's pretty long, so it may be. Now, but look at this. So this is a cost issue. The whole cost of a Cerberus is around 100 mil, 120 mil. It's a typical cost for a heavy assault ship. What do you think these modules cost? We're talking about T2 rigs. Compare the cost and realize that if you are putting on a module that's worth half of the ship cost, it may not be a good idea, especially if it's in PvP and you're probably going to lose it. So you might want to rethink those down to T1. Now these fits I'm showing you are intentionally done this way so that I can point out considerations with them. Alright, so you can learn from them. Okay, so let's see, what else do we have here? Let's look at a Lachesis recon ship. Okay, so here we have trying to resist jamming so you can keep the points. It's got lots of points at 22.5 kilometers. A fairly good armor tank here, a little bit of resist so it can be repped up with an armor fleet. If this is designed to, or intended to go with a shield fleet, that wouldn't make sense, at least the latter two. Alright, so we have a couple of missiles, a little bit of DPS from that and the drones. We've got a salvager and a tractor beam, just like, you know, just filling in low, high slots. May not be the best use of the high slots, but hey, you know, hard to think of a lot of things to go in here. You may think, oh, a little extra DPS won't hurt. Well, if it's little, it doesn't really matter. You've got a Trimark for extending that armor, so you won't be insta-popped, and an anti-explosive to fill that explosive hole on the armor. So alright, a lot of this makes sense, but what about those true Sanchas? Alright, that's expensive. You may know how much a true Sancha warp scrambler goes for? I'll give you a hint. This is going to make the price of the entire ship a lot more. So alright, we're not just talking about 60 mil, I think that's more like 80 mil. Anyways, let's assume it's 80 mil times 6 is 480 million just in those modules. The base cost of the ship as a recon probably around 100 or 120 million, maybe 130 million. That is huge. Now yes, you'll get 22.5 Ks, but seriously, that's too expensive. Now, The ECCM really does make sense because you want to hold that point even if you're jammed. But now let's compare the range. 76 kilometers. Okay, you can lock out to 175, that's fine, but you're not doing anything to increase it. But now look at these scramblers. They're at 22.5K. What range are you trying to be at? And can you maintain that range? Or does it matter if you maintain that range? How about maybe some disruptors here? Those would get you a lot more range. Yes, they use more cap, but you seem to be fine. And even if it goes over, you could hopefully last a couple of minutes with them all on. Anyhow, one ship grabs everybody. It's a pretty decent armor tank, but he needs more range on his scramblers to put out to disruptors. Don't go faction, and consider the range. This is a pretty decent range. You can apply a little bit of DPS out to 75K. Keep in mind that drone range won't go out to 75K. You'll be lucky to get these out to 59 kilometers. So you're not going to use that full 75K anyway. But 59 is certainly a lot farther than 22.5. Alright, so we've looked at a few things here. How about environment? Is this Lachesis going to be a nullsec? If so, 217 meters per second may be fine if you're trying to hold someone because you have a long range, but what if you're in a bubble? Someone throws a bubble on top of you, or you go into a bubble. How are you going to get out, and how long is it going to take? Can you last? Do you have the reps? Can you just slow boat it out and dominate the field with a good logistics core? Let's talk about the logistics now. This is the shield logistics, and it's a really good one. We're going to look at the environment and where it is. Alright, so we have DC2, Trisantia, PDS, that's money. Alright, so all of these things are adding a fair amount of cost to this thing. Wait till you get to the rigs. ISK and ISK. The only place that this ship deserves to exist is in high sec. And that's high sec without having to worry about war targets. If you have war targets, they could take this pretty logistics ship off your hands for you. Or I should say blow it up. Okay, so now we have CPU and power grid issues. Is that a problem? Maybe, maybe not. If you can put in some implants to get you plus 3% on both of those, like maybe the CA1 and CA2, should be just fine on that. Alright, so you've got good resists, 2 Omni resists in here, so that's going to cover you for Omni damage. This ship right here is designed for incursions. Maximum rep in an incursion. Now, we have 1 shield extender. We're increasing that here with the T2 rig, and we're giving ourselves as much power grid as we can with that. You can see the shields are fairly decent for a headquarters type site. So this is a Stantia incursions ship in high sec. Don't take this to low sec incursions. Or field it when you have war targets. Okay, so now let's talk about a few other considerations. That is the ship for the role. Here's the Widow Black Ops. Alright, so this is going to increase the range and effectiveness of your ECM, and you're using a lot of ECM. Signal amplifier to give you a little extra locking distance, 117K. Or torps go out to 30K. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Why do you have a signal amplifier in there? Okay, so this is a module that doesn't make sense for the range. The ranges we're looking at are 61K and 30K. Alright, so where's the tank? This obviously is putting its tank in the ECM. So if something gets through the ECM and hits it, it's going to have to go through a fairly beefy battleship tank, but it's not invincible. So you're relying on dominating with ECM. That's a pretty big risk for this ship. A Widow can run 600, 800 mil. Yeah, that's probably about right. So fairly expensive ship. Why are we using a Widow to do this? Okay, so what's the role? Our role looks like heavy ECM, the capacity to jump other ships. If you're going to be jumping other ships, you're not going into combat, and that's fine. This rule can work for that a little bit. You might want to rethink this. Instead of torps, maybe we get cruise launchers instead. Extends our range out quite a bit. Okay, here's our targeting subcontroller. What's that do? As you can see, increases the scan res so we can lock faster. Battleships are going to need that. This does give a little bit to locking speed, so if you want the best low slot module for locking speed, this is probably it, but it does better at range. You can see targeting range goes to 30%, resolution is 15, so it's not quite as much with that, but it does give you extra 2 targets. So, you know, if you have a lot of ECM, this isn't a half bad setup, but you might want to use cruise missiles in here. Now, these are Tech 1, but these are large, so large T2 can be extremely expensive, like 400, 500 million, maybe 600 million, depending on the rig. So, for Black Ops, T2 large rigs is not usually a good option. T2 large rigs are usually considered more for mothership type prices, not even for T1 cruiser type prices. Okay, so but we don't have any super expensive faction stuff on here, so the price makes sense. Okay, capacitor, just fine. Alright, so let's see, what else do we have? We talked about EHP, we talked about target size and speed. Okay, these torps are going to be best against battleship size targets. If you're engaging frigates, yeah, they'll be easy to jam, but your torps aren't going to do so much. So fortunately, you're going to have some drones, and you just make sure you carry the kinds of drones that can hit against the frigates fairly effectively. The hobgoblins and the hammerheads. If it's going to be player frigs, the hobgoblins may be a better choice just because they're going to be moving fast. Okay, so here's a few ships. I think we covered all the major things I wanted to cover. The whole cost versus item cost, environment, that is if you're going into nullsec and you're bringing super expensive stuff where you could get popped easy. We covered bubble versus propulsion. If you're going too slow, how long do you want to be stuck in a bubble? Especially if you're webbed and your whole fleet wants to get out. Yeah, they're going to wait for you. You know, they might, but you know, how long are you going to make them wait? And what's that going to do to the security of the entire fleet? If you're webbed down and you don't even have any prop mods to reduce the effect of the webs. Alright. We talked about in the distance, comparing different modules. If you've got a scrambler going at 22.5 versus heavy missiles hitting at 75.5. I'm going to bring in probably a frigate or a cruiser just to look at one more consideration with damage versus points. We talked about capacitor and just seeing how long it's going to last. If you're neuted, consider the effect on your capacitor. If this Bassi, well, maybe not this Bassi, but another Bassi is that's going to be used in PvP is neuted, how long is it going to last? If we put the projected effects, and so he's cap transferring with this buddy, you know, he's only 7 gigajoules a second in excess of what he needs. So what's a single nuke going to do? What's 2 or 3 nukes going to do? You want to consider that in your fitting. If you're being jammed, do you have any way to counter it? What if this guy's jammed? This whole fleet's kind of SOL now, because if he's jammed, he can't put out his lovely 5 T2 transporters. Does he have anything to help with his ship sensor strength? Is 22. You know, it's decent, I guess, but if you get a Falcon going on it and with one jammer that has 14 ECM strength, it's going to be a significant chance of being jammed. Looking at that and seeing if your implants. Now, if you've got the CA1 and CA2 implants, consider the cost of your implants. If you're in PvP, especially if you're in nullsec where you can be bubbled, you can't just warp out your pod. What's the cost of those implants? If you're in PvP and low sec, you want to know how to avoid losing your implants. I'm not going to go into that now because we're talking about ship fittings. Let's bring in one more ship fitting. It's going to be, let's see what we're going to get. Probably an infamous assault ship. I'm going to go frigate class, either that or a cruiser, so I can get some really low distances. Let's use, are we going to go T1? Maybe let's do T2. Let's see, heavy assault ship. And something that tends to have a little bit shorter range. Probably a zealot. Alright. That's actually better vagabond. Okay. So let's just look at a zealot. Here we have a DPS boat. Alright, let's get a real zealot though. Some of these are real fits, a lot of these are just demonstration fits. Okay, so let's look at maybe this. Oh, I'm blanking now. This last part I actually haven't reviewed. So, alright. Heavy beam, okay. Let's look at, I wonder if I have a real DPS fit here. Alright, so heavy pulse, we're going for a lot of firepower. We've got the DPS modules. It's going for a little bit of a tank through these three. It's fighting power grid, so it's using that internal force field, which is going to be a little expensive. It's around 10-12 million, if I remember right. The armor isn't half bad. It has a prop mod, micro warp, and it engages at 11 kilometers. Okay, it's not super short range here, but it is a little short, so micro warp makes sense, especially for null sec. It makes sense. But now we're missing one vital thing, of course. You're probably screaming, point! Where's the point? If you're engaging in PvP, which hopefully you are, and these Trimarchs are increasing that armor buffer, they make sense, they're T1. Where's our point? Alright, this is a great ship, except it's missing a point. Now, you're like, oh, someone else in the fleet will have a point. Alright, maybe. If you have a Lachesis with lots of long-range disruptors, maybe. You know, so then what are you going to do to help with the point? Are you going to do nothing? Or are you going to help that Lachesis to lock? So you might go over to our upgrades, grab a booster, and put a little sensor booster here. Script to scan res. Oh no, we don't need a booster, we want a remote sensor booster, so that we help the Lachesis lock faster. Okay, so this will help the Lachesis lock faster. If you have a Lachesis, what if you don't have a Lachesis? And if all of you have these things, Lachesis will probably lock pretty quick, depending on how many of these things he has on him. Alright, but there's if you have 3 or more, you're going to start to get into stacking penalties where these things won't necessarily help the Lachesis with the locking so much. Okay, so what if you get a disruptor? Okay, which one do you go for? Do you go for a disruptor? Okay, that's 24k. Your optimal is 11. You're going to be trying to hang out around 10k probably. 24k, alright. Or do you get a scrambler? Okay, 9k. This is closer to your optimal. Okay, so you have something fast, so you can get to a close range, and your ranges match. Okay, this ship makes more sense. Alright, so this is how we match ranges. I hope that gave you, there's a lot more to consider as far as creating fits that really matter and mean something. Oh yeah, there's a CPU. Alright, so how are you going to deal with that CPU issue? Okay, look at the modules with the highest CPU, and then you say, alright, what am I going to do to decrease the CPU? You might even decrease the CPU here, except you're going to lose a bit of range. So it's going to force you under the 9k mark. So, you know, what do you do about the CPU? Obviously, you're going to have to do something. So, it doesn't necessarily make sense. Are you going to get those implants? Are you going to sacrifice one of these slots for a a CPU rig, that's a waste of a low slot if you put a CPU processor in there. But I'll show you where it is. There's CPU upgrades. Under electronics and sensor upgrades, you need to slap one of these on. That's going to take your tank down a little bit, but if we switch it out with one of these energized, you don't even need it. If you switch out with one of the energized, how much do you have? You've got an extra 12.5. So you could throw something with 12.5. You might want a little bit more cap. Obviously, you're not necessarily going to be running it all the time, so you can be fine. But a cap, a CPR doesn't necessarily use that much. CPU only uses 8, so I mean it's an option. So think about whatever you're needing for that ship. Try to match the modules you have with the bonuses on it. If you don't have to do a scrambler and you can get someone else with bonuses to scramblers and you can help them out, remember it's not just about transferring responsibility, you also want to help those with responsibilities if you're not going to assume that role. So let's consider those things that we mentioned and avoid making this video too long. I'm going to go ahead and end it here. Hopefully you'll feel a little bit better about fits that you do and understand more about what makes a fail fit. Talk to you guys later.